Hey guys, how are you? It's Amir Reiter, CEO of CloudTask. I'm here with Rod Feuer, right? That's how you pronounce it?
Sure.
Help me. Help me
Foyer.
one more time. And I asked you this before we started the webinar, and I got it
Yeah,
wrong.
no problem.
So,
It's Foyer.
so Rod and I
It's
both have the common goal, right? A common goal of helping companies get results from sales teams. We approach that problem from two different angles. Rod has a company called Costello, which creates automated playbooks that integrate with technologies like Salesforce and HubSpot. And as you guys know, we manage SDRs and account executives. So this was a great conversation that Rod and I had in Dreamforce. And for today's discussion, we really wanted to kind of drill down into the idea of how do we reduce SDR and BDR ramp time in 2019, especially now that a lot of sales and marketing leaders are looking to build their teams. Thought it'd be a great time to talk about how we attack that issue and some of the misconceptions that people have. And Rod, appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today and share some of the valuable lessons you've learned. I see you've been a VP of Demand Gen, a strategist, chief operating officer, and now the co-founder. Love to learn more before we get into this about your background and how you came here to this stage where you're investing in helping all of us sales leaders and leaders scale their team.
Yeah, Amir, thanks for having me on, and thanks for asking about my background. I think we started Costello, Frank and I did, because we had similar backgrounds. We run companies and run sales teams, and had consistently run into the same challenge, which is reps. In order to be successful, the most successful reps are consistent, right? They may not always realize it, but there's a method to their madness. There's a structure to the way they run calls and have conversations. But when it came to actually executing on calls, they didn't have a great kind of way to do it. They were using Google Docs, or they were using PDFs and things, which are really hard to actually use on calls. So when you talk about scale, if you want to take what your best reps do and scale it across your team, the tools didn't exist to do that. And so we created Costello to help every rep who's talking to customers have great conversations, deliver value in every call, because the data shows that if you do that, the entire team can hit their quota, or a high percentage of your team can hit your quota, and you can hit your goals as you scale.
Yeah, and I think one of the big things that you hear, and especially that I hear, is whenever I'm speaking with leaders and sales leaders, and we talk about specifically the ramp time for our SDRs and account executives, I typically hear, I expect them to be calling in 2 weeks. They can produce results in the first 4 weeks. They get up to speed in 1 month. And what I've noticed is that if you look at reports that actually interview leaders, the average ramp time is 3.1 months, right? The average time for an SDR to get up to full speed is 14 months. So it seems like there's always a big disconnect with reality and what people emotionally expect. And do you find that often happening with a lot of the companies that you guys approach? Do you typically ask them about their average ramp time, and are you getting back answers that just don't comply with what statistics show?
Yeah, no, I think, on the ramp time in particular, because when we're hired by companies, especially when it comes to working with their SDR or BDR teams, ramp time is the number one lever we're trying to pull for them. And you actually nailed it. Like, we typically see that 3-month time is what we're seeing. So our anecdotal data based off of our customers fits with the research that you're citing.
And what's your goal? Do you have a specific goal of cutting the national average down in half, 30%, 40%? Is it?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. From what we've seen in our data is we're able to help customers shave at least 30 days off of their ramp time. So, about a third off of their ramp time if you take the 3-month average.
That's great. And that's a good goal. And that's kind of why we started the conversation, right? I think for us, instead of butting our heads against our potential teammates and saying that ramp time's not realistic, we decided to go for it, right? And prove that we can beat the average time. So if you don't mind me asking, what are the biggest challenges sales teams face with outbound prospecting? I know that's a broad question, but there's a lot we could talk about. But what are the biggest challenges you see?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge we've seen is how to structure a good cold call. And it sounds like a really simple thing, but when it comes down to it, there's a handful of things you need to do well, and most people don't do them well. And in general, people kind of forget what the point is. Like, the point of the call is to generate enough interest to get to a meeting, to book a meeting. But what people don't really always understand is, what does it take to get people's interest. And that's where the train goes off the rails a lot of times is there isn't a great understanding of, well, what is the way to get there? And that's where we typically help sit down with teams and help them think through that and get better answers to those questions.
So what I'm hearing is that they're not great at getting customers' interest in the first 30 seconds, huh?
That's the killer. And it sounds like super obvious thing. Well, duh, that's the point of the call. But after the duh is usually, well, shit or shoot. How do I actually? What do I need to go do? How do I actually create that content, create that compelling story to deliver to actually get to pique their interest? And we spend a lot of time with customers on that question.
Now, do you think that customers and potential clients having trouble communicating their value prop, or do you typically see that customers have their value prop and they have it locked down and they're just not able to transfer it to their reps? Or is it a combination of them not really knowing their value prop and not having a structure to get what they don't know to their reps? Like where's the buck?
Yeah, no, it's kind of there's a lot of different ways to tackle this. Let's start, and I'm sure other things will kind of come up as we go. I think when you think about the cold call, it's the hardest part of sales. You have to take, to your point, this value prop and distill it into 30 seconds, but you can't talk about yourself. So think about it for a minute. Like you spend a lot of time talking about, hey, we're company X and we solve this problem for people. But when you call somebody, they don't want to hear about you. So you know, what we talk about at Costello is there's a lot of human psychology that goes into how we think about things. Humans care about a few things. When they're talking to a stranger, they care about, do you know me? Can I trust you? And are you credible? And if a rep can't answer those three questions with whatever they're delivering in that first 30 seconds, the person's going to hang up or they're just going to not be interested. And if you think about how people typically approach it, you know, some folks will say, hey, I'm Rod with Costello and we do X, which is you've demonstrated nothing about like that you know them. They don't know who Costello is, and you haven't delivered any kind of value in terms of what you've done for somebody. Like you've failed all three questions. And a lot of companies take this approach of like, hey, I'm Joe with so and so, and we do X for people like you. And you haven't followed you haven't demonstrated knowledge about them, and they're just kind of like,
yeah, they don't
exactly. You don't pique their interest. So that's the challenge. So what we've done is we've taken a step back and said, okay, when you break down the first 30 seconds, what are the three things you've got to get right? And so I'll kind of walk through this, and you can kind of pick me apart and say, well, what about this and what about that? There's always the first 5 or 10 seconds, which is that intro, right? You've got to get the intro, get past the first 5 or 10 seconds, which is, hey, my name is Rod. And then, you know, will you kind of listen to the next 30 seconds? So that's part one. Part two is, what is that story or what is that stat that you're going to deliver that isn't about you? It's more about answer the question, like, do I know who you are and do I know a problem you probably have? So what's that story? It's got to be tight and linked to your value prop, but not like you're not referencing yourself. And then the third piece is, what is the question you're going to ask at the end to get them to respond in a way to actually demonstrate, like, I'm going to think about this for a second, and I'm not just going to give you the blanket, I don't want to talk to you. So that open-ended question, the how question, that what question, those are the three key pieces. And it takes a lot to get that right.
And this is structured, obviously, within Costello, right?
That's right. We help you take those pieces and put them in front of the rep so you can deliver it and then iterate on it depending on what's working and what doesn't.
Do you find that certain companies have different revenue streams, different value propositions, which typically will increase onboarding? And in those scenarios, do you recommend companies specialize, where instead of having somebody learn everything, they have someone learning just one value prop, just one persona? Or do you think that there is the ability to teach multiple personas, multiple pathways? Because it's an important thing, right? You work for a company, there's different personas, different areas of hacking, and I think it becomes confusing for a rep to know which one to start with, right? Which is
it's awesome question. I mean, as you know, with account-based marketing and sales, and just good sales in general, I think over the course of sales, like knowing who you're talking to is really important. So I think you have to know your personas these days, but everything rolls up to the same core value prop. How you talk about it can differ across personas, but it's not like your value prop completely changes from person to person. It's just you use different words, you use different language. Maybe some of the examples you used are a little different, but at the core, if you as a rep, if you're onboarding, if you can make sure that you understand and like internalize what the basic value prop is, and then learn how to extend it to other personas, you'll be in really good shape. And that takes time. But that's the way we think about it, because most folks that we talk to, yourselves included, I know a lot of folks you work with, as we partner together, like they have 4 personas, they have 3 personas. And
Yeah.
so you have to arm the reps with questions and stories that are relevant to those different personas.
Yeah, and it comes down to like the must-have appointments versus the I'd like to have appointments, right? And I think you find that a lot of companies with these multiple value props have certain products and services that are easier for them to scale, and then they like to test things, right? And I think where they like to test new personas is where they get in trouble. Do you recommend that people focus fully on mastering one pitch versus scaling out? Like, do you see people, when you see teams, do you see successful teams that break down training into just one persona and then another, or are they doing 3 personas?
I think it's hard for me to answer because I don't know exactly how all the teams train. What I would say is, if you're selling to 3 personas, you have to learn to sell to 3 personas. I think if I had a preference for how to train against that, it would be, let's get one right. And because I kind of mentioned before, you've got your intro and then your body and then your open-ended question. We didn't even talk about what comes after that in a cold call, because if you do get someone interested, they're going to have a response. And then you've got to master your response to their response. And there's typically 3 to 4 responses, like a choose your own adventure is what our customers say. So to try and like master 3 at once feels hard, where if you kind of build a muscle memory around getting one persona right from top to bottom of a call, and then you can then extend that kind of muscle memory to the next kind of couple personas, that's probably a better approach than to try and like do all 3 at once. That just, humans aren't built that to kind of digest information that way. So I would personally prefer to start with nailing one top to bottom of a call and then replicate that across.
Yeah, that makes sense. Master the concepts behind one successful call,
yes.
and then plugging in a different persona, a different problem becomes a lot easier because people have that framework not only in their mind but visually in Costello. And bringing up visually in Costello kind of brings us back to how we started this conversation. So here at CloudTask, as you know, we were creating very detailed playbooks, sales enablement playbooks. They come delivered in the first 90 days to our clients. But what we noticed was that they looked great, the content was great, but they weren't really being used, right? And I guess this kind of brings up a question. In your experience, how have you seen playbooks being used? Are they functional, or do they look pretty? And how does Costello come and play into that? Because that's how this conversation started, right? I sent you some of our playbooks. You thought they were interesting, and I know deep down inside that I wish our playbooks were more functional, right? And we were at a point where we were very happy with them, because having a playbook is better than not having a playbook. But I feel like we're able to skip a few steps here. But yeah, I'd love to see more about your experiences with companies.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about there, and I'm glad you mentioned that the playbook becoming functional, I think, is a really important piece, because I've seen your guys' playbooks, and they're wonderful documents. Because as I mentioned before, I think one of the biggest misconceptions about prospecting is that reps have to know the product before they can hop on the phone. And based on all the things we've talked about, if you're talking about answering questions like, do you know me, can I trust you, and are you credible? Those are questions about the customer. And so your playbooks that you've developed start with the personas and really understanding their goals, their pains, what they want, which I think is the perfect place to start and to really dig in deep, because it means your reps are understanding everything they can about the customer. But then to your point, where I've seen, and we work with a lot of, we work with sales trainers, sales consultancies, outbound, SDR and AE shops like yourselves. The biggest challenge they have is then, as you said, that last mile problem. In fact, the original name for Costello 3 years ago was we were going to call ourselves last mile, because we help solve that functional problem where you've got all this great thinking and playbook content, and how do you get it into a format that is actually conversational, that reps can then use on calls to have really good conversations, versus one issue with playbooks is great content, but they stay at kind of like a theoretical level or at a conceptual level. And sales reps are very concrete thinkers, right? And it needs to be tactical. It needs to be tangible. And so that's a really important thing, is to extend that content into, okay, what do I go say? And you use another word I want to call out, which is, it's a framework. We're not building scripts. We're building a framework for reps to work within, so that they don't feel like they're robots, so that they have some autonomy, right? But they still need to operate within the framework that you've set out to deliver a really good call.
Well, it makes sense. Before you freestyle it, you have to get the basics down, right? I think all of us regardless of title, want structure, right? And then we typically will learn best practices and get out of that framework. So, to me, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because also muscle memory, right? I think a lot of people will use this framework, and then that framework will spill out to, personalization, but they have to start somewhere, right?
That's right. I mean, think of any kind of professional, whether it's a professional musician or a professional athlete, it's what they do in practice that makes them great during their performance. And, I had an old coach back in the day who said, practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. And so what that means in sales is you really have to do the thinking and the work up front around what is a really good call structure, what's some good content or the right question to ask, because words matter in sales, as you know. Asking the right question. If you ask one, let me give you an example on our own. We used to ask an open-ended question at the end of our, we tell our story in the first 30 seconds and ask a question, and it took us down the wrong path every time. Like the people didn't understand what we were selling, or they got super tactical too quickly, and we just lost the conversation. So we spent a lot of time iterating on that one question, right, to make sure that foundation was tight, that framework was tight. And once we got that, it opened up the conversation, right? But we really had to be meticulous with how we practiced that content and that question before we got to the right answer. And without good practice, we just wouldn't have gotten there.
Well, I'm going to ask, what was that one question? I need to know.
I'd have to go into.
If it's secret, it's okay.
Into Costello and go pull it up. But yeah, I'll have to come back to that. I'll have to look it up.
That's it. We'll save it for our the next time we connect.
Yeah, exactly.
So one of the things that we didn't talk about, we talked about how important ramp time is, quality. We get all that, right? And this is a big thing on a lot of sales leaders and leaders' minds, right? But one thing that I noticed that leaders and sales leaders are measuring, right? They're constantly measuring pipeline and opportunities and close sales because it's obtainable, it's real, it's measurable, right? I can measure how much I'm investing in a sales team and how much sales qualified leads they're bringing back, how long it closes. But what they're not measuring is the amount of business they're disqualifying, right? Because I think we live in a world where if you do connect with somebody over the phone, LinkedIn, and email, and you get their attention, and if you say the wrong things, and by wrong things I mean just you're not delivering your value prop, you're not positioning yourselves as a leader in the space, you might potentially close the door forever with somebody. And what people aren't measuring is that. Do you ever walk into an industry and see companies that have that on the forefront of their mind? How much business am I disqualifying, right? Is that ever something that you hear come up? Do you think about that as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the toughest things to figure out, because it's easier to figure out, hey, we should have closed these guys, but we didn't. What did we do wrong? Versus, it's like the false negative is what you're talking about. False negatives, I think, are really hard to figure out. So I think it's part of it is what are the ways in which you can catch the false negatives?
Yeah.
The laborious way, but I think probably one of the best ways is probably using for every time your rep has a conversation, can you, and if they didn't convert, is there a way for you to listen to that call? That's a laborious way to do it. But that's one of the ways you can do it. Another way to do it is for all those conversations that don't turn into a meeting. I think you can literally have the rep at the end. This is what we're doing now internally within our own product, is to say, what did you learn and what could you have done better? And the learning piece is, well, hey, I don't think they're a fit. Well, if you say that, you can then go ask, well, why wasn't it a fit? Like, you can start to ask probing questions of the rep, because I can tell you from our perspective, we are lead scoring our leads. So like most people should be qualified when you're talking to them. So if they're not a fit, it means either our lead scoring was off, like our data was off, or did the rep just not quite, that's kind of a leading indicator for 80% of these should be good. So what happened there? And if they have to tell you what happened, it forces them to think about it, and you can find a way to say, tell me more, because I'm not sure that maybe you had a conversation that wasn't spot on.
Yeah,
and then you can figure it out that way.
Something that I've seen some of our reps do internally, and I'll call ourselves out because we're always improving, is, on a call, we offer SDRs and BDRs that are managed, and sales chat happens to be one of the booming channels. We partner with companies like Drift, and we've had real success with it. But I've heard some of our team call, and instead of starting off saying, we have SDRs that are managed, by the way, are you using this channel? Sometimes they would say something like, I noticed you had a high web traffic, and, did you ever consider sales chat? And immediately the companies would think that we were a sales chat technology, right? And they would say CloudTask, sales chat technology, not interested, and it would label us. So I noticed that just a little, this is in the first 30 seconds, right? Saying in the first 30 seconds how you structure that approach can give the client or potential opportunity the wrong message. And right, like we've done that quite a few times. And some of these companies, whenever they see CloudTask, they think technology company. And I think we live in a world where our reps have the ability to tell the world who we are in the right way or the wrong way at scale. Like never before, right? So that's right. That's something for us that brought us together as leaders is knowing that, but not seeing people measure that. But it's definitely something that's really, really real, right?
But that's a great example, and let's talk about that. Like if you had a way to know at the end of a week, hey, we had 20 conversations, only X number have converted, and it's lower than we would have wanted. If you can go to the rep and say, well, what conversations did you have? And they said, well, they thought we were a technology. You've got your answer. Like the good news is you don't need a ton of reps to figure out where things go wrong. If you have a feedback loop, and I think one thing we can talk about here, because I'm really curious to hear how you run your teams and how you build learning machines so you can get there, is how you can quickly figure out where those problems are so that you don't keep making the same mistake. So I'm curious, because it's your business, right? You have to execute well, otherwise you won't have customers. I'd love to hear how you guys, especially when you're first getting up and running with a customer, how you build out your first version of what a cold call framework looks like, and then how you iterate on it to kind of figure out what works.
So that's a good question. It's a long answer, and it's obviously something that we lose sleep about, right? Because as a managed service, as being PPR, our real value proposition is that the management is included, right? We include, by principle, if somebody hires an account executive or a business development rep or a sales development rep, they come with an account manager who's typically more seasoned, has been working for longer, understands marketing and sales, make sure the person's working day to day, right? They come to work at 9, they hit their first phone call by 10, right? Like, are they actually working, right? Because before you can say it's the wrong strategy, wrong training, you need that in place to see the person's working. And then we actually have a head trainer that's part of the management team that can actually spot train in real time. And we have a philosophy here that training never stops, right? So we do have a very defined training program, but we want to have a culture of everybody in our company is a coach, and everybody has the ability to be a trainer. Now, there's obviously dedicated trainers that come with the service, but we want everyone to have that training approach. And then something else that right off the bat that makes us different is we have quality assurance agents and quality assurance teams that listen to calls in real time. We have a partner we work with called Jiminy, and during a call, we can listen in real time and give coaching. And we're also able to create repeatable libraries of calls. So fundamentally speaking, we set up a culture of coaching, a culture of training, and management, right, to be in place to make sure that we're actually actively training. So that comes in place right away. But then when we start with a client, we basically start in the beginning, right? We start with understanding their current training program, their enablement documents, their technology, right? Because very well, we might work with a customer that already has Costello, correct? So we don't have to fix that, right? We can just jump in. So first we kind of find out what the technology enablement and training is. And then we work backwards and actually take the training, go through it, make improvements when we can. And then by actually using people's training, coming on site, they come on site for us, we're able to get on speed faster. And then by partnering with technologies like Costello, like Jiminy, we're able to reduce that time, and then having the employees in place to drive those technologies is really important, because there's a lot of technologies out there to help training, to help with this, but people are really struggling when it comes down to using it. So I think for us, the big thing is having the people, the manpower, the mission, and the concept of training never stops was number one. And then the rest becomes actually the day-to-day measurement, training, and improvement. I don't know if that answered your question clearly, but that's really part of what we do, and that's obviously part of why we have this partnership, because we see your technology as an integral part of onboarding quicker. Because manpower and training is X, right? Technology
Yep.
is Y, right? So marrying the training and technology to the actual day-to-day is part of our core structure here.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first person I met at your company was your head trainer,
Yes, it
David,
was, yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so that was that's a key part. What do you guys find that you do better? So when customers hire you, obviously you guys are specialists in this. You guys are great at this. What do you find is the number one thing that you tend to do better, perhaps, than your customers do out of the gate, that like really gives you a leg up?
That's a good question. I think having a full understanding of marketing and sales, and also training our team in marketing. We are HubSpot partners, and we believe that marketing and sales have become one, right? So most of our clients, most of our partners don't have fully integrated marketing and sales teams just yet, right? You find that bigger companies with higher revenue, their teams are a little bit more disparate. Younger companies want to be there, but I think coming into it with the marketing knowledge and teaching people the marketing has definitely helped us and made us special. And then really collecting data in specific fields. As you know, we work a lot with SaaS organizations and technology service companies, and you start finding repeatable outcomes the same way you would want to hire a business development rep or an account executive that worked for XYZ industry because of what they've learned. We're picking up these best practices, these datas, and then we're actually partnering and marketing. We're working with a lot of marketing and sales technology companies. We want to get hired by companies that are in this space, because the more we work with them and help them grow, the more we learn their technologies and the better we are at building tech stacks for companies. So that's been really making us special. And as you know, we actually include all the technology in our salary. So companies that work with us don't have to pay multiple licenses. They don't have to implement it. They pay one flat fee. They get all the technology stack. So kind of giving people the ability to get pre-trained reps on preset technology stacks has given us a big advantage.
Got it. So you kind of have your own internal playbook for how you built kind of a scalable sales infrastructure that you can then leverage across multiple clients.
Yes. I'm like, there's very few times that we ask the sales leader, for their actual 30, 60, 90 KPIs that they expect an SDR or a BDR and account executive to have, and they give us a solid answer. So what you find is that no matter the size of the company, it's hard. I'm like, it's very hard for a company that does, XYZ to also be the best at coaching, training, and scaling. It's by nature, one of them has to give, right? And it's usually the culture of training and scaling. So yeah, we're just focusing on that. And then also transparency. We don't really hide what we're doing with our clients. We share everything with them because we want them to be on the same page. So they're getting the strategy, they're agreeing with it. That's been really working.
Yep. I think one of the things that's probably important for people watching is what's something that they can take away and go do, same day or same week to kind of, as you're mentioning up top, how do we get 2019 off to a great start, given your culture of training and how important that is to keep it fresh and keep your reps up to date. What have you guys found to be, some people do role play, some people do different types of training. What have you guys found to be one of the most effective tactical things that from a training perspective that's worked for your teams?
I think more hands-on training, right? I think what you find is that there's the course training, right? There's the show and tell training, there's the Q&A training, but then there's the actual hands-on training. So I think finding that right combination. I think we went internally from, and I was just talking to the head of trainer actually a few minutes ago about this. We pivoted very quickly from more of a course-oriented training to more hands-on training, right? And even when our guys internally with CloudTask, before they work with clients, they work with CloudTask, when they hit the phones, they're actually calling, and unfortunately, I hate bothering the guys who are not qualified, but we call unqualified people that we know are all qualified. So we're actually having them start with unqualified people to practice, which, sorry for the guys that are unqualified and we're calling and bothering, but just being more hands-on, right? Having more hands-on training before they actually go live, right? Let them, same way that if you work in medical devices, you might be drilling in the cadaver in a second day of work, right? I think that getting
Sure.
people on the phones early, getting them researching early, getting them going through the motions in a sandbox environment has really helped us.
That's great.
Yeah, and then like I said before, working with technologies and partnering quickly with companies like Costello, Jiminy, Chorus, Gong, also has given us a leg up because companies are slow. They're slower to adopt these technologies, and they're often, what you find is that companies that purchased a lot of this technology typically did not implement it and drive it well, and then they can cancel, and then they're back at square one, right?
Yeah. No, I love the calling the cadavers, so to speak. Something that we just did ourselves because we've been iterating on our messaging, as I told you. We called our customers, so people that are already using us, and we got the permission to kind of cold call them and get their feedback. So, kind of another tip: if you have customers who are willing to do that with you, I think because they know what you do and they can kind of and you know that they're your target customer, they'll give you some really good feedback on what you're missing or what didn't make sense to them as well.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. One thing that we forgot to mention that I'll bring up, what I think, in my opinion, I think the culture of SDRs and BDRs being promoted to account executives creates almost a vacuum in the quality of callers, because it's the guys who actually master the call and they have it in their head, right? And they're good. They're getting qualified appointments. They then get promoted to account executives. And once they're account executives, they're no longer exercising that skill that got them to become account executive. So I think the current system of how we promote and separate our sales machines creates this vacuum where, it creates a big opportunity for a managed service like ours and a technology like yours to address this problem of constantly having new SDRs that are average life for the client is 1.5 years before they either voluntarily resign, have to be released, or get promoted to account executive, right? So it's creating the ever important need for people to focus on this area.
No, that's right. I mean, I think it's the circumstances are the way, BDRs and SDRs are incentivized to get promoted because the compensation structures, aligned in a way where they're just going to make more becoming an AE. I think one way to help that, what we've seen some of our customers do, and ourselves included, is our AEs actually still have a certain percentage of their time allocated to prospecting to keep that muscle fresh. Like there's still, as an AE, you become more diagnostic. And what you do is just everything you do is just different. Like that first 30 seconds or first 2 minutes is so specialized, but I still think it's so important because being able to tell that story, build that muscle memory, so to speak, still serves you well when you're an account executive.
Yeah.
But there is still a difference in terms of what that role is supposed to do. So it's just a tough thing. It's tough, right? It's tough both for the company who has to always promote these people and build, backfill for them. It's an ongoing challenge. And so
no, it's ongoing. I'm like there's a lot of churn in SDRs and BDRs, and like I said, the best guys are going to account executives. How often do you see a culture of account executives that are spending time once a week, once a day training SDRs and BDRs? I'm like, you don't really see it that often, right? You see account executives that are saying, I need more qualified appointments. This SDR or BDR is not setting them, but you don't really see them coaching, right? It's something I haven't seen. So I think a lot of companies need to really reward a coach, like a coaching culture, right? But until that day happens, I think it's great that there's organizations like Costello making it easier, right? Because for me, it seems like you guys definitely accelerate that culture, right? And
there's another interesting thing you bring up though, where I think the bridging of the gap between SDRs and AEs. I think because we hear a lot about the handoff problem between those teams, and I think when you talk to AEs, they're like, oh, we're getting things thrown over the wall that aren't qualified. And then on the other side from the SDRs, we hear, hey, we're throwing great opportunities over to the AEs, and they're telling us those aren't qualified, but we know they are. Someone who's done a really good job, there's a VP of development at a company called Workfront. His name's Justin Hyatt. He's tremendous. And there is this problem that he helped solve, which is really bringing the teams closer together. Because if you have a dialogue between the SDR team and the AE team, and let's talk about what the real problem is here. Like, hey, account executives, if you're telling us that what do you need from us so that no matter what we send you, if we haven't fulfilled our end of the bargain, we'll both know it. And there's no ambiguity, right, around what a good qualified lead is. And so he worked to actually build out that very simple framework so that whatever he sent over, it literally, if it checked the 3 boxes, it was very difficult for an account executive to not accept. And it wasn't that they were forcing things in there. It was just that they both agreed on, hey, what are the mutually agreed upon objectives that say this is a good opportunity? And then it just eliminated that point of friction. And as a result, good things tended to happen. So I know it's a little bit different than what we're talking about, but I think that SDR AE handoff, I think is an important problem to solve. I think it's very solvable.
No, it makes sense. So listen, we could talk about this forever, and we will. But I think the big thing here is that 2019 is coming. Companies are going to be building their sales team, and I think they need to know, whether they adopt new technologies, new practices. I think the big takeaway from this webinar is that you don't need to know a lot about the product, hit the phones, right?
Correct.
Big takeaway. And sticking to a call format, intro, body, open-ended questions, the best response path for the most common objections, responses, and questions, asking for the meeting, right? And capturing the 1 to 3, maybe 4 to 5 factual, contextual places of data to set the next call are a core structure that every leader and sales leader needs to be thinking about today, right?
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I think while it sounds, deceptively simple, the reality is when you really start to go to work with your team, this is actually the most fun part about sales, right? If you're a sales manager who oversees BDRs and SDRs, getting your reps in a room to do this exercise, it does wonders for the business because the front line's talking to customers all day, and they're co-creating the call structure. So reps are bought in, they've got their viewpoints there. The SDRs can provide their own kind of native learnings there, and then they come out of it. And they test it together and they learn together. And I just think there's so much that teams can do in 2019 to kind of build that content together in that format you just talked about that can yield big results early. Exactly.
So just to leave our viewers, if they want to check out Costello, where will they find you?
Sure, they can find us at www.andcostello.com. So A-N-D Costello.
One of the things I like about your site is it's very clear. It says how I help sales leaders. How I help, and I like that because it gives you a clear pathway of exactly who you help and how you help, and that's kind of how I found you. Listen, I appreciate this call. I know we're going to have some other conversations after we get some data for 2019 and share with everybody listening today. So I wanted to thank you for taking the time to chat with us, and we will look forward to some of the new innovations. I know that your product itself has a huge roadmap. I'm not going to share anything with the guys in the call, but I know that it's at the place where it's helping people reduce their RAM time already, and it's going to continue to continuously improve. And I appreciate you for building the technology that helps us at CloudTask deliver more repeatable outcomes and faster onboarding for our clients. So we're all connected in this ecosystem, which is awesome. And I think what we're ultimately trying to do is we're trying to allow leaders to be able to focus on making their products and services better, right? Because if they can worry less about managing teams and training teams, they can spend more time advancing their product. And I think we're all connected here, helping the leaders of tomorrow focus on their products and spend less time on some of these big costly issues like training and ramping up salespeople.
Yep. Yeah. Let salespeople sell, right? And make it fun. So
exactly.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on. Great to talk to you. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Likewise.